Welcome to another edition of Radio Influencers, a podcast series we're doing for Radio Update. And I'm so happy to be focused on sales. I have Devon Shuman with me. How you doing, Devon?
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
You are the SVP of Sales at Gen Media Partners. Is that right?
That's right. I concentrate on all what we call non-metro sales, which I'm sure we'll spend some time talking about.
Yeah, and you did get your start in radio. Can you kind of tell them your radio origin story before we get into all the sales talk?
I love that you call it an origin story. That's great. Yeah, I'm 25 years in now. I was a University of Florida grad, and I came to Atlanta to visit on a girlfriend who had graduated a semester earlier than me. And she was working at JWT. And to show you what life was like 25 years ago, after lunch, we went and sat at her desk and literally went card by card through her Rolodex, looking at all of her contacts. And I spent the afternoon faxing my resume out. And I was really actually lucky. It was kind of kismet. I got preferential placement on someone's desk at InterRep Atlanta. And they were looking for a sales assistant. And I started at McGavran Guild 25 years ago. And here I am. We're a different version of McGavran Guild, but a lot of the same stations, a lot of the same players, a lot of evolution between then and now.
I remember that fax machine was so frustrating. It was sitting there, especially when everyone would send their copy that way and having to wait for it. Yeah.
The fax machine. I mean, we had huge desktops at everybody's desk. And I remember thinking, wow, this is so of the moment. And now you don't have a laptop that you can grab and go. Who are you?
Yeah, I had somebody quit via fax one time, and I thought that was kind of unique.
Handwritten, I quit.
So one of the big, jumping into the national sales topics, and by the way, you've written some really great articles for Radio Update. I appreciate you doing that, and I encourage everybody to jump on there and read those, kind of focused on national sales. But one of the big questions I get from clients and from potential clients is about national ad revenue. And they know that the big groups can get it. They know that the big market stations can get it. But is it still possible for the small and medium market stations to get some of that national revenue?
Sure. Well, let's just start by defining it, because when I started 25 years ago, it depends on the market, depends on the station players. But for the most part, I think 20% of overall station revenue came from national. And it depends on the market again, but now it could be single digits easily. There is just less national spot radio. To paint the picture, we call it the ever melting ice cube, where the national spot revenue is the polar bear sitting on his little island, and it gets smaller and smaller every year. And that's just what it is. I remember InterRep put tons of effort and funds into a Radio 2020 campaign, and that was trying to push radio revenue share up to 20% by the year 2020. Obviously, that has not happened, and it's dwindled every year. It has a lot to do with that new shiny toy, that marketing thing that every year evolves. And, you know, marketers and brands want to stay relevant and cutting edge. And radio still is a legacy media that works, but you have to work it. And when they are divided with so many options, it can get really hard to get their attention. So let's just start by saying that, because national in general, can you get it no matter the market size? Yes. Is it what it was 20 years ago? And the quick answer is no, for a variety of reasons. But specific to your question about small and medium market, that really is Gen Media's specialty, and it's my specialty specifically. We have a whole team dedicated to finding creative solutions for brands and marketers that want to target small markets. Another visual for you is the Nielsen Metro map. And I'm sure you can see it, and it's all color coded. And right now, Nielsen has 248 different rated radio metros, and they're all plotted in different colors, right, depending on market size. The gray space, what we call it, is literally the counties in between these rated metros that do not live in a Nielsen rated MSA. And that 20% we call non-rated. There is not a Nielsen MSA book per se. There is less data to sell, but it represents 20% of the US population. So if a national
A lot of
brand
people.
comes in, yeah, a national brand comes in and wants, complete and total coverage of the US, they think, oh, I'll just buy Nielsen's 248 rated metros, or I'll buy this unwired or wired network that will give me everything I need. They're usually wrong. They're usually missing a fifth of the population. So this is a huge part of what we do and how we sell, kind of filling in the framework around why these communities and these consumers are really valuable and important for national brands. But as
Well,
you
and
can
one of the
guess,
things about the 248 markets, as you know, they're like I work with a market that was rated just a couple years ago that has, the main city, their city of license has 90,000 people in it, Lawton, Oklahoma. It was like market 260 something,
right?
but they've dropped a couple of those markets that still have a pretty sizable population.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because, sure, it's not that there isn't the population or the population density there. It's that nobody wants to fit the Nielsen bill
Right.
because
It's
maybe
not
they
cheap.
haven't found the ROI for the surveys. I do believe where there is a national Nielsen number, that magical number that sits in front of a market name, more national business will flow. And this is what I wanted to kind of set us up to talk about. Um, because it's easier. These huge agencies are very data driven and they're used to standards and metrics that Nielsen provides as their currency. And so, in these communities where there isn't that level of data and understanding, it's really
Hmm.
easy for them to just navigate around it. So, to your specific question, can a small market find national business? Of course. But is the job harder than a market that has that Nielsen number in front of its name? Absolutely.
Well, and I'm assuming that's part of the reason it's so important to have a rep like you guys working with you as opposed to trying to fight through all that on your own. So
Sure.
anybody listening, it's like, oh, I can just do this on. It's not easier said than done, right?
Sure. Well, I think a big part of the national uh, job right now is to break down gates and barriers, right? The agency, part of their job is to play gatekeeper. They have thousands of vendors with
Sure.
hundreds of great ideas that all say they have the thing that will sell the product or the service, right? And so their job is literally to shut us out so that they can clear through the noise and get their clients their best options. If you think as a single radio broadcaster in a single market that you can cut through that clutter, sometimes you'll be right, but I think the most of the time you'll be wrong. One of the
Yeah.
reasons these national agencies use national reps is because of just scale. They need to talk to as few people as possible, representing as many vendors as possible. So GMP, let's think about the radio universe right now. GMP works with over half of the radio broadcasters in the country. There are 11,000 plus radio signals, commercial radio signals in the country, and 56% of them are on our list. But most of them, again, are unrated, are outside of these Nielsen rated metros. So we don't represent the largest share of national spot revenue, even though we have so many stations. Because so much of our work is developmental and trying to get these agencies and brands to understand they're missing portions of the US by not specifically targeting these communities.
Well, and when you talk about developing it, so most of my experience is obviously at the local level and working with stations at the local level. So I understand how lead gen works on the local side. I mean, a lot of
Sure.
it's friend to friend, or word of mouth, or
Sure.
listening to your competitors and seeing who's advertising. How's it different on the national side? How is that lead gen done
Yeah.
with a national rep firm?
Yeah, a lot of the same tactics, certainly. I mean, we're always asking our radio stations to keep their ear to the radio and tell us what they're hearing. tell us what they're seeing, because obviously we have stories to combat um, television and broadcast and all the things, right? So, what is happening in your local communities and in your trading areas that we can bring back to the agencies? Either through competitive spend. Hey, here's an insight into this market. Your biggest competitor is spending and you're not. You're losing, share of influence. Or something brand new that's come to the market. I think that's a great way for us to find new business for our stations as well. But I
Hmm.
think, and I wrote about this in one of my articles for you, the most important thing that we can do is to have our stations have that local relationship with local decision makers. Again, the
Right.
agencies are playing gatekeeper. They have tons and tons of people wanting their attention. And it's really tough to cut through the clutter. I think we do a fine job at it. But certainly, what would absolutely arm us is if an actual brand or local decision maker, marketer type says to their agency, the client says to their agency, I want more information on this, or I want
Sure.
my specific local market funded. That's where we really get into kind of that synergistic, perfect storm where we're having our local contacts push their local contacts. We're pushing the national agencies, and we meet in the middle.
Well, and I wonder if it's changed a little bit post COVID and with everybody being more open to remote working, if those
Hmm.
decision makers are probably spread across the country now where they were concentrated in a couple of cities,
Yeah, I
you know.
mean, that's a great question. I think it depends on the brand. I think about some of the categories that do really well for a small market, and it's QSR or cell and telecom, or grocery. So these kind of categories still have really local decision makers. And sometimes these local decision makers don't have a ton of authority and don't have a lot of purchase power. Um, but amazingly, sometimes they do. And so we
Sure.
really, in a soft national market where everyone's looking for new opportunity, I feel like this is the lowest hanging fruit, right?
Well, and a lot of times they at least have the ear of someone who does have that authority, so it never hurts to develop that relationship and get to talking to them.
Absolutely.
How can radio do a better job? Radio as a whole do a better job competing with other forms of media and digital competitors like
Yeah.
Spotify and Pandora, in your opinion?
Right. That's a huge question. We could spend hours talking about that, right? But I think you have to start with our very best stories, especially when we're talking about smaller markets and local communities. The real power of local radio is that local connectivity and community, and that a lot of that stems from the jocks and DJs. What we
Hmm.
always say is the smaller the market, the more important the local broadcaster. There are literally less marketing vehicles in a small community of 100,000 than there is in a New York city that has literally thousands of ways to touch a consumer, right? So it makes the local broadcaster that much more important. And very often, the station owner or the AM drive host might also be the mayor. You will run
Right.
into him at the grocery store. He might sponsor your kids' softball team. And this is not an example for sake of example. Like, this is what we see is that the community leaders are involved in the local broadcasting. And these jocks are the ultimate original local influencers. There's so much, talk
Absolutely.
right now about using digital influencers to sell products and services. And that's an old game for radio. I
Right.
feel like if a national brand really wants to come in and break through and kind of connect to that trustability of local radio, which is kind of a term everybody's throwing around right now because digital, in many consumers' mind's eye, is not trustable. They don't know the slant, they don't know the bias, they don't know where the information is coming from. But when you hear it on the radio, you immediately assume it must be true. And I don't know if we're using that power of influence and the power of our influencers to the best of our ability. It's really our most valuable tool right now, in my opinion.
Well, and I love that you said that about being the original influencers because that's so true. I mean, we've been doing endorsement ads
Yeah,
since radio began, and that's the whole trick of them. Trusted name, trusted voice. That
plug right
absolutely
in
is
to
an influencer.
somebody's local celebrity status.
Yep. Yeah. So, and I always put it, they've been stealing tricks from us for years on
Yeah,
the digital side. So
isn't
why
that true?
not take some of their tricks?
Well, and there's also great research that um, I think it'd be hard to tell a brand in 2024 not to use digital. I think it needs to be
Right.
part of your strategy. But there's tons of research that supports that using radio in conjunction will really lift your digital campaign. We are the reach medium, and we can also perfectly target down to a zip code and a county. So it's like the best of both worlds for really cheap compared to some of the other mediums. So, you know, I think radio is a no-brainer.
Yeah, and showing some of the statistics of how many people still listen to radio, how many people
Wow.
still own a radio, and if you want to surround a consumer all day, radio has to be part of that buy if you really want to
Absolutely.
do that.
One of the
So,
best pieces that I love and I reference so often is that radio is usually the last touch before point of purchase. Nobody nobody can be in literally in your ear like radio can right before you make your choice on
mhm,
lunch or where to stop for groceries. So
that's true.
nothing could be more valuable.
What is direct to brand marketing? I saw you mention that in one of the articles. Can you kind of explain what that is?
Sure. So we're a national rep firm. We talk to agencies, national agencies is what we call them. Usually these are in major metros across the country. But that doesn't mean that's all we talk to. We also talk to brands directly, even if they align with an agency. And sometimes brands throw their hands up and say, talk to my agencies. And
Yeah,
sometimes brands say, that's a good idea. Let me connect you to my agency. And sometimes brands say, oh, yes, I have an agency, but I also have this pocket of money that makes great sense for what you're selling. So I wrote that specifically so that your readers understand that yes, 90% of our business is agency business. It's pre-planned business, and we are fighting for maximum rate and share. But we're also in the business developmental game, and we are trying to talk to new people with new ideas.
the thing that always made me nervous at the local level when an agency was involved and I knew I had a relationship with uh, the the brand or the company
Yeah,
was I didn't want to tick off the agency by
yeah,
going around them. How do you kind of walk that tightrope of
sure,
not ruining the relationship with the agency by going directly to the advertiser?
sure. There's still sensitivities, but I don't feel like it is what it was a decade or two ago. I almost
Hmm.
think it's expected for vendors to have their own relationship um, with brands. If you can, it's not an easy thing to do.
Sure.
Um, but especially since so many brands are using radio for that local connection, that would be silly for a station representative or owner to meet a local contact, say at a remote that was planned through a national agency and not
Right.
forge their own thing. So I think, sure, there's going to be sensitivities, and there are going to be some agencies that don't want you to speak to their clients directly. But it is my experience that as long as you're bringing value to the table, you're open and honest, you can go back to the agency and say, I have a relationship, but I'm bringing you in. I want you to understand the conversations that we're having so that we're all armed to make the best decisions possible.
Yeah. So kind of keep them in the loop. And yeah, yeah, I think that makes sense. So you kind of touched on this earlier, but you've been doing this for a while. What's really changed on the national sales front since you started and maybe since a decade ago?
Sure. Um, Tons. But
Yeah.
I will say the first thing that popped into my head is the use of technology. And I think because we are a legacy media, Some people don't like that. Some people literally have 100 years of family radio ownership and want to do things how it was done in the past, and
Hmm.
maybe sometimes can be late adapters um, or adopters to whatever is new and fresh. Um, but especially again with national, it's even more important to stay in the moment and with the preferred communication, technology, tools, and tech, because it's really easy to get left behind. And I think we're already kind of seen as this old dog. And so we need to constantly be evolving and make it easy for these national agencies to work with us. And that means staying really relevant um, with technology so that, and this is really important for national and maybe not so important for local, but we invest in so many applications and research and subscriptions and things that help us electronically communicate with our decision makers. It's a huge expense for our company, but it's absolutely necessary when you're getting thousands of orders a day.
Sure.
Nobody, we laughed about faxes earlier, but nobody has a fax machine anymore. When an agency sends you a paper order, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, it didn't come over electronically. I don't know what to do. And I have to think about the processes because so much of it is automated now. So I really think one of the biggest in my line of work in this national focus, the biggest change has been the adoption of technology and how much we use now to do our job well. And of course, there's the less is more, not like I heart less is more, but like smaller staffs that do more business and more volume because we're just better at processing.
Yeah, yeah, and I like the way you worded it, the adapting and evolving. And one thing, yeah, I've mentioned before, I call it the way we've always done it curse. It's
Mm,
hard, especially those of us that have been in the business for a really long time, to
sure.
evolve and change the processes the way we've always done it. But I
Right.
mean, there's some of the old rules that still apply, and
Of
some of the
course.
things that we've done. But you know, we would all be better served by embracing some of this technology and using it to help us be more efficient and proficient.
Sure. One of the other things that has come a long way, I believe, is just the research that we use to sell our medium, and then specifically small and medium markets. We spoke about Nielsen's rated metros, and there's this data that national agencies really depend on to make all of their choices. And in a smaller market, there isn't. So Gen Media has done a really good job of cultivating and curating research and stories for small market broadcasters and small markets in general, um, because it's not there. And when we turn to these large agencies that are so data driven and say, these consumers are valuable, and they say, show me why, we have to find something to help us sell. And so that has come a long way in the last bit. It really is our specialty, and so we're constantly looking for fresh ideas and stories and way to really amplify and highlight the value of these communities and the broadcasters that serve them.
Well, yeah, because kind of when you're in a non metro market, or you've made the decision not to pay Nielsen because you don't feel like
Right.
you can afford it because of your situation, you do need some kind of data to sell off of.
Sure.
Another thing I always push them to really be smart about how they do their promotions and contests, to collect some data so you
I
can kind of
agree.
tell your own story.
I
You know.
agree 100%. Um, Anecdotal works. Again, the agencies and these buyers have literally been trained from day one to look at certain standards and live in that ranker box. And this is where a local sales effort and relationship can really win us some big forward progress, because a local decision maker will absolutely understand the impact of these local broadcasters on their community and will understand how important or valuable it could be to be at this event where 20,000 people come together for a free concert. A national agency, a 20-something media buyer in New York City thinking about Lawton, Oklahoma, is not going to understand, right? And so that's really where the salesmanship comes in, and having those local relationships that can also push.
Yeah. If you were a GM in a small or medium market, how would you balance the local, how much time and energy you spent chasing local, regional, or national dollars?
What an interesting question. I have to remind myself that while national is all I do for some of my stations, it might be 5% or 10% of what they do. And so I really have to check myself. My agency want it yesterday, and I don't want to be the reason they say no to the pitch or the proposal or whatever is pending. So hitting those deadlines and being the first to respond and just having good salesmanship, right, is so important. And so sometimes the national rep has to do things that may be all of our comfort zone because our radio stations are not immediately available. And that means going with gut instinct on the rate it will take to clear, and pulling things from old proposals just to make it happen, to hit deadlines, because that's just our game right now. It is speed, it is scale, and ease of purchase. And we don't want any of those things to slip and then our stations or radio be on the chopping block as a result. So to your question, answer specifically, I want all the GMs to spend much more time with national, but it has to be relative to the type of revenue it's bringing in. And
Sure.
I recognize that. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's super important to work with a national rep that you know, that you trust, that specializes in a market like yours and your size and your situation, because there will be plenty of times that they're just going to need to take their market knowledge, their station knowledge, and run with it because they can't get you on the phone, because you, Mr. GM, Mrs. GM, have so many other things that you're trying to manage, right?
Well, and I like that you mentioned scale and speed. I talked to Greg Tasher a couple of weeks ago, and I talked to Trey Morris on the sales side. One of the things that I've been kind of thinking a lot about on the sales side with radio is how our sales MO hasn't changed in forever. How it still kind of takes 4 or 5 meetings sometimes to buy radio, even if you know what you want. And that do you have any opinions on that, or what,
Sure.
whether we should adjust our model?
Sure. I mean, I think it's more like 7 or 8 meetings, and it depends. Are we talking about established business, or are we talking about developmental?
New. Yeah,
Okay,
new.
so with new, I go back to my technology podium because I just feel like decisions are made so differently now. I'm not saying we don't have face-to-face relationships with our key decision makers, because we absolutely do. But do we get the opportunities that we did 20 years ago? Is it the standard for a station to come in and take all of their buyers to lunch and talk about the market? It's amazing when it happens.
Sure.
But it doesn't happen like it used to, for COVID reasons, for budget reasons, for logistical reasons. And so I think you have to change or be left behind. So one of the things that we have tried, to varying success, but we're throwing all the spaghetti, right? We really do own this small market space, this gray space on the Nielsen map. And how can we best show the value? And we have a podcast right now, just like yours, but ours is called The Small Market
Secret Sauce?
That's
Is that
right.
Yep.
The Small Market Secret Sauce. And it's when we bring on some of our live and locally owned broadcasters in these small markets, and we talk about what makes them special And we're not talking about station call letters. We're not talking about usually stations at all. It really is at the market level. How do we bring new advertisers to your market? We need to fund your market. If we can fund the market, then I can sell through your stations. But right now, we just need the agencies to recognize that you have valuable consumers in your market that will buy these products and services. And so this is one of our tactics. Um, so I mention that because, of course, number one, we're proud of it. It's a fun podcast, and
Yeah.
um, our broadcasters love it, and I think it does shine a light on the value and importance of these communities. These are the type of things when we're thinking about how can we elevate the small and medium market story that we're doing. That's outside of the box. That has nothing to do with um, cold calling, right? So, but cold calling is also a hugely important thing. We are looking at, you were mentioning local new business development and some of the tactics used. We're doing a lot of the same things. We look at national media monitors. We look at who is spending in network because that's a great sell for us. National networks are literally wired together through programming. So some of the small and medium markets will get missed because they are more focused on live and local. So you might not be getting the coverage there that you anticipate. So use us as a supplemental fill in. So we've talked to network advertisers with that kind of story. We ask our stations to call in and email us with any new businesses that are opening, any competitive things. A political category is a great example. So
Hmm.
often the right will spend as soon as the left spends, or vice versa. And so, one of the tactics, and it's not a standard 7 touch tactic, but it works. We have a political spending report that we send out every day that literally pulls the orders from our system from the night before within the category and pushes out detail, dollar amount detail, station level detail to everyone on the email list. So all of our political agencies get this daily note from us. And it's one of the ways that we have found success in working with new campaigns and new agencies because they want this information. They want this
Sure.
key insight that otherwise is really hard to harvest. So I go back to technology. Yes, is picking up the phone and introducing yourself or walking in and having your valid business reason important. Yes, all of those things are important. But I also think using technology to tell your stories um, is also important, and being creative is also important, and constantly thinking about what's the new thing that might get people interested and engaged.
Yeah, and just adapting your approach using technology. I mean, just as simple as we're using Riverside, you can use
Yeah.
Zoom, you can use Teams, but if
Yeah.
you can't get out in front of that client, I mean, invite them to a quick Teams meeting. So at least you're still getting that face to face time. But we all have to be willing to do some of that.
I agree. I think video for sales is the new frontier. I think we use it a lot internally, um, but perhaps it's underused for solicitation and new business development. So it's something that we're thinking about right now, and how can we harness the power? Because,
Well, and what's so great, so easy to record it too, so you can
right,
go back and reference it. What did they say about that? Oh, just watch the video.
right,
You know.
amen. That's right.
So I really appreciate you doing this. How can they get a hold of you, by the way, if they're listening and they need a national rep?
Oh, yes. Call me, please call me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find our company on LinkedIn. We're on every social channel because we recognize that you have to be where your decision makers are. We talked earlier about these New York City buyers that might be 20 something. And while as a 46-year-old woman, I might not be newly interested in a company and look on TikTok. I might actually do a web search. They will start with TikTok. So
Sure.
I think it's important for us to be wherever they are, wherever our decision makers are. So you can find Gen Media on all the social channels and platforms. LinkedIn, of course. And then our website is genmediapartners.com. And if you want to reach out to me directly, I am devon.shuman@genmediapartners.com.
Well, and like I said earlier, definitely check out the articles Devon has written for Radio Update, because you really lay it out real well, defining what national revenue is and why it's so important to have a rep to get that. But I really appreciate you coming on. This is not something I'm an expert in any means, by any means, and so I love you sharing your expertise on it.
I really appreciate the time. This has been fun.
Radio Influencers is a Radio Update production. New episodes are released on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern.